In the Northern Territories, Scent decided fate. It chose rulers and servants, hunters and prey, those who lived freely, and those who were owned. Among wolves, omegas were rare. True omegas were not supposed to exist at all. They were spoken of in fragments and warnings. Born under broken moons, marked with a scent powerful enough to shatter packs and unmake kings. They were never protected. They were erased. By the time Lyra entered Stormhold pack, she had already learned how to survive by disappearing. Her scent was dull. Her eyes were always lowered. Her wolf barely stirred. No one knew where she came from. No one asked. And Lyra made sure no one ever would. But fate has a way of recognizing what has been hidden. And the night Lyra stepped into the Alpha King's hall, silent, masked, and unseen, the air shifted. Not because she spoke. Not because she acted. But because something buried too deeply had begun to wake. Chapter 1. Stormhold pack did not notice servants. They noticed strength. They noticed dominance. They noticed power loud enough to command attention. Lyra possessed none of those things. She rose before dawn with the others assigned to the lower halls, fetching water, scrubbing stone, keeping her eyes lowered and her movements precise. She learned the rhythms of Stormhold the way prey learned the forest, where not to step, when to stay silent, how to disappear into routine. It was safe this way. No one questioned a girl who smelled like nothing and spoke even less. She had been in Stormhold for 3 winters when the summons came. Not for her. For the hall. A gathering had been called, alphas returning from border disputes, emissaries from allied packs, guards lining the stone corridors with sharpened patience. Servants were ordered to move faster, keep closer to the walls, and speak only when spoken to. Lyra was assigned to the outer edge of the great hall. Far from the center. Far from attention. Exactly where she belonged. The Alpha King had returned that morning. Stormhold shifted when he did. It always did. The pack moved differently, straighter spines, quieter voices, instincts tightening beneath skin. His presence settled over the territory like a storm that did not need to announce itself. Lyra did not look at him. She focused on the tray in her hands, the familiar weight grounding her as she crossed the threshold into the hall. Stone swallowed her footsteps. Heat and scent pressed in from every direction. Dominance layered over dominance until it felt like standing beneath something enormous. She took her place by the pillar, as she had been instructed. At first, nothing happened. The hall filled with voices and movement. Alphas argued borders. Guards shifted positions. Power displayed itself in small, careless ways. Lyra remained unseen. Until the air changed. It was not sudden. Not dramatic. It was wrong. A pause threaded through the space, thin as a held breath. Conversation faltered, not stopping, just losing shape. Somewhere near the center of the hall, a glass cracked in a servant's hand. Lyra felt it then. A pressure low in her chest. A warmth she had not felt in years. Her grip tightened around the tray as instinct flared, sharp, frightened, awake. The suppression she had built over time strained, responding to something she did not understand and had never allowed herself to name. Across the hall, the Alpha King stilled. Not because someone had spoken. Because his wolf had risen. His gaze lifted slowly, scanning the room, not searching for a face, but for a disturbance. For something that did not belong in the present. Scent reached him in fragments. Muted. Damaged. Deliberately broken. And beneath it, ancient. Recognition hit like memory resurfacing from another life. The bond did not snap into place. It did not roar. It waited. Lyra lowered her head further, breath shallow, heart hammering. She knew this feeling. She had felt it once before, long ago, just before everything had gone wrong. She took a step back. The Alpha King's eyes locked onto her. Not with certainty. With confusion. With restraint. Because the stories were old. 4 centuries old. And every one of them ended the same way. True omegas did not survive discovery. And fated bonds did not leave kingdoms standing. The whole held its breath. And somewhere between denial and destiny, the first crack formed. Chapter 2. Stormhold did not erupt into chaos. That was what unsettled everyone most. The Alpha King did not bark orders. He did not summon guards. He did not demand the servant be brought forward. He did nothing. And yet, the air remained tight, coiled, watchful, aware that something unfinished lingered between stone walls and waiting instincts. The Alpha King turned away first. It was deliberate. Measured. A refusal sharp enough to feel like command. Conversation resumed in fragments, voices too loud, laughter forced. The pack followed his lead because that was what Stormhold had always done, trust that its alpha understood threats before they became visible. Lyra did not move. Her pulse roared in her ears, her body still braced for impact that never came. The pressure inside her chest ebbed slightly, replaced by a trembling exhaustion that left her fingers numb around the tray she still held. No one approached her. But eyes lingered longer than they should have. When the gathering finally dispersed, the Alpha King issued a single quiet order to his second-in-command. Remove her from the inner halls. Not bring her to me. Not question her. Not claim her. Remove. Lyra was escorted to the servants' quarters beneath the western wing, farther from the pack center than she had ever been placed before. The guards did not touch her. They did not meet her eyes. That too was a choice. The Alpha King remained in the great hall long after it emptied. His wolf paced, furious and restless, slamming against restraint. The bond tugged at him like a wound left open, demanding recognition, demanding completion. He denied it. Not because he did not understand what it was, but because he did. 4 centuries ago, the last fated bond to a true Omega had nearly shattered the northern territories. The records were fragmented, censored, deliberately incomplete, but the aftermath was not. Wars had followed. Packs had fallen. An Omega had died, and an Alpha King with her. Since then, the moon had been silent. Until now. The Alpha King pressed his palms against the stone table, grounding himself in pain and discipline. If the bond completed, the consequences would not be his alone. Stormhold would become a target. Lyra would become a prize. And true Omegas did not survive being known. That night, he ordered silence. No discussion of what had been felt.
No speculation.
No questioning the servant girl. Lyra returned to work the next morning as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Her suppression no longer held cleanly. The scent she had dulled for years wavered, slipping through cracks she could no longer control. She caught alphas pausing mid-step, heads turning slightly as if sensing something just out of reach. Servants whispered. Not her name, but rumors. Something wrong with the alpha. Something restless in the pack. Something old stirring beneath Stormhold. Lyra slept little. When she did, dreams clawed at her, moonlight, blood on snow, a voice she could not place whispering a single word. She woke with burning in her chest. Hide. On the 3rd night, the Alpha King stood outside the western wing longer than he intended. He did not cross the threshold. He did not call her name. But his wolf knew exactly where she was. And for the first time since the bond stirred, he understood the most dangerous truth of all. Resisting fate did not weaken it. It sharpened it. Chapter 3. By the 4th day, Stormhold began to feel smaller. Not in distance, but in breath. Lyra sensed it first in the mornings, when the air pressed heavier against her skin, when familiar corridors felt watched. The pack moved with a tension they did not name. Alphas lingered longer in doorways. Guards changed routes without explanation. Something was wrong. And everyone felt it. Lyra worked harder than ever to disappear. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, her movements predictable. But the discipline she had relied on for years no longer answered her the way it once had. Her wolf stirred. Not loudly. Not defiantly. But awake. The first crack came when she dropped a bowl. It shattered against the stone floor, sharp and sudden. The sound echoed through the corridor, and with it, a pulse of scent slipped free. Not strong. Just real. The god nearest to her froze. His head turned slowly, nostrils flaring as confusion crossed his face. Lyra's heart slammed painfully against her ribs as she lowered herself to gather the shards, hands shaking. "I'm sorry," she murmured, though no accusation had been spoken. The god said nothing. But when he stepped away, he did so too carefully. That night, Lyra locked herself into the smallest storage room she could find, pressing her back against the door as she struggled to regain control. She had survived worse than this. She had endured hunger, silence, and years of being unseen. But this was different. Her body was remembering something she had forced herself to forget. Moonlight filtered through a narrow window, silver and intrusive. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut as heat spread beneath her skin, her wolf pushing closer to the surface with every shallow breath. Then the memory came. Not whole. Not clear. Just a scent, iron and pine. A voice, urgent and breaking. A single word pressed into her mind like a command. Hide. Lyra slid to the floor, breath hitching as her fingers dug into her sleeves. On the other side of Stormhold, the Alpha King woke with blood on his hands. Not real. Dream-born. He stood alone in the great hall, banners torn from their mounts, the stone floor cracked beneath his feet. In the center lay something he could not see clearly, only feel. Loss. He woke with his wolf snarling, claws flexing, the bond pulling harder than before. Denial was no longer enough. By morning, Stormhold knew. No one said it aloud, but the shift was undeniable. The Alpha King's presence pressed outward, no longer controlled, no longer distant. Orders became sharper. Patrols doubled. Outsiders were turned away without explanation. And Lyra was moved again. This time, not away from the center. Closer. The justification was mundane: labor redistribution, efficiency, necessity. But the message was not. She was placed under direct observation. Protection, some called it. Containment, others understood. When Lyra realized where her new assignment placed her, within the inner corridors, just 2 doors away from the Alpha King's chambers, her knees nearly buckled. She did not belong there. She had never belonged anywhere that close to power. The Alpha King did not seek her out. That was the twist. He avoided her. Passed her in silence without looking. Stood close enough for the bond to hum painfully between them, then turned away. It was restraint taken to cruelty. For both of them. Lyra felt it then, not fear, not longing, but something far more dangerous. Relief. Because if he did not claim her, then perhaps she could survive this too. She did not see the way his hand trembled each time he passed her. Or the way Stormhold's elders had begun to watch them both. Or how the moon lingered longer over the pack each night. The cracks were spreading. And soon, hiding would no longer be an option. Chapter 4. Stormhold had survived wars, winters, and betrayals. It had never survived secrets. The elders felt it before anyone spoke of it. They gathered at dusk in the upper chamber, 5 wolves whose authority came not from strength, but from memory. Their sense carried age, restraint, and something far heavier, history they had sworn never to repeat. The Alpha King stood before them in silence. "You felt it," the eldest finally said. It was not a question. The Alpha did not deny it. "There is an anomaly within the pack," another elder continued, choosing words with care. A disturbance old enough to wake things we buried. The room tightened. Lyra was not named. She did not need to be. Records were pulled that night, sealed scrolls etched with lunar sigils, histories copied and recited until they had become legend rather than fact. Most of the younger packs believed the stories symbolic. The elders knew better. 4 centuries ago, a fated bond had formed between an Alpha King and a true Omega. Not a political mate. Not a chosen one. A bond written by the moon itself. The consequences had been catastrophic. The Omega's scent had driven rivals mad. Packs fractured, alliances collapsed, and the Alpha King, unable to separate protection from possession, had turned war into inevitability. By the time the moon withdrew its favor, entire bloodlines had vanished. The true Omega had died. And with her, the bond. Since then, true Omegas were erased from record. Their existence reframed as myth. Their scent suppressed by law, by force, by silence. Survival through disappearance. Below the council chamber, Lyra scrubbed stone floors that were already clean. She felt the weight of the pack pressing inward, attention sharpening, curiosity hardening into calculation. Whispers followed her now, not careless but deliberate. Why is she here? Why now? Her wolf recoiled, urging retreat, urging the one lesson she had never forgotten. Do not be seen. That night, the Alpha King made a choice that changed everything. He summoned Lyra. Not publicly. Not formally. A quiet command delivered through intermediaries, framed as necessity. She was brought to a small chamber adjacent to his study, not a throne room, not a cell. Neutral ground. Lyra stood just inside the door, hands clasped, eyes lowered. Her scent strained against her control, trembling beneath layers of practiced suppression. The Alpha King did not speak immediately. When he finally did, his voice was steady, but not unmarked. How long have you been hiding? Lyra flinched. Not at the words, but at the fact that he knew. She said nothing. I will not claim you, he continued, as if the bond were not thrumming painfully between them. I will not expose you. But understand this, Stormhold cannot remain blind forever. Silence stretched. Then quietly, she answered. I don't need protection. It was not defiance. It was survival. The Alpha King's jaw tightened, not in anger, but recognition. Because he understood then what the elders feared. This was not an Omega who would beg for safety. This was one who had learned to live without it. And that made her far more dangerous, to herself, and to the world. Outside, the moon climbed higher than it had in centuries. And somewhere beyond Stormhold's borders, other packs began to feel the pull. Chapter 5. Long before Stormhold. Before suppressants. Before kings and bonds and halls of power. There was a cottage buried beneath pine and frost. It was never meant to be permanent. Just a place to disappear. Lyra had been small then, too young to understand why the world beyond the trees was forbidden, too young to grasp why her mother never raised her voice, why the windows were always shuttered at dusk. She only knew this. Her aunt, her mother's sister, never let her stray far. The woman shared Lyra's name. Not by coincidence. By design. She had been the first. The first daughter born under a fractured moon. The first true Omega in generations. And the reason Lyra still breathed. The aunt lived half a life, masked, muted, restrained by bitter teas and constant vigilance. She taught Lyra how to walk without sound. How to still her breathing when fear surged. How to erase herself when instinct screamed to exist. Wolves survive by scent, she would say softly, brushing Lyra's hair back. But we survive by silence. Lyra's mother had never wanted that life for her child. She believed love could be stronger than fate. That belief killed her. The neighboring city's Alpha came without warning, drawn by something he could not name but could not resist. He smelled the ant's power through layers of suppression and distance, through walls and denial and prayer. He demanded a bond. Lyra's mother refused. She stood in the doorway with shaking hands and a steady voice and said no. The Alpha did not argue. He struck. Not in rage, but certainty. Because in his world, Omegas did not refuse. Lyra remembered the sound. Not the scream. The silence afterward. The ant moved faster than grief. She dragged Lyra to the cellar, hands trembling but sure, and shoved her into a storage barrel meant for grain. The wood was cold. The space barely enough to breathe. Hide, her aunt whispered fiercely, pressing her forehead to the rim. Just one word. But it carried everything. Fear. Love. Command. Legacy. No matter what you hear, she continued, voice breaking only once, no matter who calls your name, you do not move. You do not breathe. You do not exist. Lyra wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but her aunt was already standing, already lifting her chin, already becoming inevitable. The Alpha took her that night, dragged her from the cottage and into legend. Lyra stayed in the barrel until morning. She stayed until her throat burned and her limbs went numb and the world learned to go on without her. That was the night Lyra learned the truth no one ever taught her. Being alive was not the same as being safe. And safety was never free. Years later, standing in Stormhold, that word still lived inside her bones. Hide. Even now, when the Alpha King watched her with eyes that saw too much. When the bond whispered promises she did not trust. Her wolf curled inward. Because the first thing she had ever been taught was not how to love. It was how to disappear. All right. Chapter 6. Stormhold did not erupt. That was the most dangerous part. There were no riots. No open challenges. No public accusations. Instead, the pack watched. Lyra felt it everywhere, in the way conversations quieted when she entered a room, in the way eyes lingered just a second too long before looking away. Wolves who had ignored her for years now seemed to catalogue her movements, her posture, her proximity to the Alpha King. Her scent, still masked, still carefully suppressed, no longer passed unnoticed. It was not strong, but it was wrong. And wolves were creatures of instinct before reason. The elders moved first. Not against Lyra. Against the idea of her. They summoned the Alpha King again, this time not in secrecy but under the pretense of governance. Formal robes. Sealed chambers. Witnesses. You are risking the balance, one elder said plainly. The Alpha King did not flinch. I am preventing bloodshed. You are delaying it, another countered. A presence like hers does not remain hidden. If she is what we suspect. She is not a thing, he snapped, the room freezing at the edge in his voice. Choose your words. The eldest elder sighed, weary rather than defiant. 4 centuries ago, we lost everything because a king believed love could override instinct. Silence followed. Outside those walls, Lyra scrubbed her hands raw at the wash basin, unaware that history was being measured against her pulse. She felt the Alpha King before she saw him later that evening. Not his scent, his attention. He stopped several steps away, deliberately. No touch. No command. They're afraid, he said. So am I, Lyra replied quietly. That honesty surprised them both. You should leave Stormhold, he continued. Just for a time. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere quieter. Her head lifted sharply. You're sending me away. I'm giving you an exit before someone takes that choice from you. The word choice struck deeper than any command ever could. Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. I have spent my entire life leaving before I'm taken. Hiding before I'm seen. I will not run because others are uncomfortable with my existence. He studied her then, not as an alpha, not as a king, but as a wolf who recognized survival patterns carved into bone. Then understand this, he said carefully. If you stay, others will act. Not because they are cruel, but because they are afraid of what you represent. And what do I represent? She asked. He did not answer. Because the truth was too heavy to give voice to. That night, the challenge came. Not to the Alpha King. To the unknown Omega within his territory. A formal declaration, old law, rarely invoked. A demand for verification. For exposure. For proof. If Lyra was nothing, the challenge would fail. If she was what the elders feared, Stormhold would never be the same. Lyra stood alone in her small room, suppressants lined neatly beside her bed. For the first time in 8 years, her hands shook as she reached for them. Because hiding had kept her alive. But now, hiding was putting everyone else in danger. And somewhere deep within her chest, her wolf stirred. Not in fear. In defiance. Part 7. The night the moon did not look away. The challenge was issued at dawn. By dusk, all of Stormhold knew. Old law demanded old ritual, public, undeniable, witnessed by pack and moon alike. If the Omega was false, the accusation would collapse. If she was real, the truth would no longer belong to her alone. Lyra stood at the edge of the inner courtyard as wolves gathered in widening rings. No weapons were drawn. None were needed. Curiosity was sharp enough. The Alpha King arrived last. He did not take the center. That mattered. By stepping aside, he made one thing unmistakably clear: this moment was not his command. It was her choice. Lyra's breath came shallow as the air pressed against her skin. The suppressants weighed heavy at her throat and wrists, familiar and cruel. 8 years of habit begged her to tighten them, to retreat, to survive. Hide. The word echoed. But something else answered it now. Not louder. Stronger. The eldest elder stepped forward. By ancient law, the Omega will present herself without masking. No claim will be made. No bond invoked. This is revelation only. Murmurs rippled. Lyra looked once, only once, toward the Alpha King. He did not nod. Did not command. Did not reach for her. He simply waited. And in that waiting, she found something she had never been given before. Space. Lyra lifted her hands. The first clasp fell away. Then the second. The suppressants loosened, not all at once but gently, as if even her body feared the truth. Her scent changed. It did not explode. It unfolded. Sweet, yes, but layered with restraint, grief, endurance. A scent shaped by survival rather than surrender. The courtyard went still. Alphas stiffened, not in frenzy, but shock. Because this was not the myth they had been told. This was not a prize. This was a wolf who had suffered and endured and remained whole. A true Omega. The moon crested the stone walls then, full, silver, unhidden. And the bond answered. It did not snap. It recognized. The Alpha King inhaled sharply, not stepping forward, not claiming, not asserting. His restraint was absolute, even as destiny pressed against his ribs. The elders felt it. So did the pack. A fated bond. The first in 4 centuries. Silence stretched, reverent now, uneasy, afraid. Lyra stood alone in the center of it all, unclaimed and unbowed. I will not be tested like an object, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I will not be fought over. And I will not accept a bond that strips me of choice. Gasps followed. She turned, not to the crowd, but to the Alpha King. If the moon chose you for me, she continued, then it must have known you would let me speak. he answered without raising his voice. She did. No claim was made that night. But something far greater happened. For the first time in centuries, a true Omega was seen, and not taken. And the world shifted again. Chapter 8. The court expected a declaration. They expected the Alpha King to rise, take Lyra by the wrist, and claim her before the moon altar. To bind her fate in front of kings, elders, and gods. That was how it had always been done. Lyra stood at the center of the stone circle, the moonlight spilling over her like a verdict. She could feel the weight of it all pressing into her spine, the whispers, the hunger for power, the fear disguised as reverence. Every gaze treated her less like a person and more like a prophecy waiting to be owned. She had lived her whole life like this. Seen. Wanted. Never chosen. The Alpha King stepped forward. The court inhaled. And then, he stopped. He did not reach for her. Instead he turned, not to Lyra, but to the council. You ask me to claim her, he said, his voice steady, unyielding. As if power is something seized. As if destiny is a chain. A ripple of unease moved through the hall. Lyra looked up, startled. No, the Alpha King continued. I will not cage what was born to choose. The elders erupted. She is moon-marked, one shouted. She is bound by fate, cried another. The balance depends on her union. The Alpha King did not raise his voice. That, he said quietly, is your fear speaking. He turned then, finally, to Lyra. But not as a ruler claiming a prize. As a man offering ground. Lyra, he said, so only she could hear, this world has taken from you long enough. Today, you decide who you are. Not me. Not the moon goddess. Not them. Her breath caught. No one had ever said that to her. Ever. The moonlight shifted. The air thickened. And then, movement. 8 figures stepped forward. The 8 Kings' Guard. Warriors sworn not to crowns, but to balance itself. Each one different, scarred, silent, fierce, weathered by battles no songs ever named. They moved as one, forming a half-circle behind Lyra. Not to trap her. To protect her. Steel met stone as they knelt. Not before a prophecy. Before a person. We stand, said the first, his voice rough, not because she is powerful. But because she is free, said another. A third lifted his head, eyes burning. And because anyone who tries to take her choice, answers to us. Lyra's hands trembled. She turned slowly, looking at them, really looking. They were not staring at her like she was something to possess. They were waiting. For her. In that moment, something inside Lyra shifted. This was power. Not control. Not obligation. Not sacrifice demanded. Support that did not ask for repayment. Strength that stood behind you, not over you. Tears blurred her vision as she lifted her chin. I was told my birth was for balance, Lyra said, her voice soft but carrying. 4 kingdoms. 4 gods. She paused. But I was never told I had a choice. The Alpha King met her gaze. You do, he said simply. Even if the choice is to walk away from us all. The moon altar pulsed. The goddess watched. And for the first time in generations, the moon did not command. It waited. Lyra closed her eyes. She felt the truth settle in her bones. Her power was not a leash tied to fate. It was a door. And she alone held the key. When she opened her eyes again, she stepped forward, not toward the Alpha King, but beside him. I will walk my path, she said. With allies. With family I choose. Not as a weapon. Not as a prize. The moonlight flared, then softened. Acceptance. Not domination. The goddess's voice echoed, gentle and rare. so it is written only when it is chosen. The 8 God rose as one. The Alpha King inclined his head, not in claim, but in respect. And Lyra understood then. She was no longer alone. Not because fate had decreed it, but because she had been seen, respected, and stood beside. By those who understood that her destiny was never meant to be taken, only shared. Chapter 9. The circle did not break when the revelation ended. It tightened. Lyra felt it before she saw it, the shift in the air, the sharpening of attention, the way hunger crept back into eyes that had briefly remembered restraint. True omegas were not meant to stand unclaimed. And fate, once revealed, was not supposed to be refused. An alpha from the western ridges stepped forward first. Then another still. They did not bare claws. They did not snarl. They smiled. For centuries, one of them said softly, "Do you know how many wars your existence could end?" Another voice followed, smoother, colder. "Or start." Lyra took a step back without meaning to. Not in fear of teeth or claws, but of certainty. Of hands already reaching for a future that did not include her consent. "You cannot leave this unresolved," an elder alpha said. "A true omega must be claimed. Balance demands it." The word must struck harder than any threat. The Alpha King moved instantly, placing himself between Lyra and the advancing circle. His voice cut through the rising murmur like steel drawn clean. "She has not chosen." A scoff answered him. "She doesn't need to," someone said. "The moon already has." That was when it happened. The moonlight faltered. Not dimmed. Bled. Silver drained from the sky, replaced by deep crimson that spilled across the clearing, painting stone, skin, and breath in red. Every wolf froze. A pressure descended, not violent, not crushing, but absolute. The kind that reminded bone and blood what they answered to. Lyra felt it coil through her chest, ancient and familiar, like a presence that had always been watching. Then the voice came. Not from the ground. Not from the sky. From everywhere. "Have you learned nothing?" The sound was neither loud nor gentle. It did not echo, it settled. Alphas dropped to their knees without realizing they had moved. Once before, you mistook destiny for entitlement. Images flickered at the edges of memory, wars, blood-soaked altars, omegas dragged beneath banners of righteousness. Once before, you claimed what was marked, and called it order. The pressure tightened. Lyra did not kneel. Her breath shook, but she stood. "She is not only moon-marked," the voice continued. "She is moon-chosen." A gasp rippled through the clearing. Chosen was different. Chosen meant purpose. Chosen meant will. "Her existence is not a prize to divide," the goddess said, "nor a weapon to wield." The red light burned brighter. "You will not repeat history." The moon's gaze settled fully on Lyra. Her path will be taken by choice. Or it will not be taken at all. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Then slowly, the crimson faded. Silver returned to the sky, cool and distant once more. The pressure lifted. Some alphas looked shaken. Others furious. A few, afraid. The Alpha King exhaled, steadying, and turned to Lyra. She realized something then. The world had not protected her. The moon had not saved her. Choice had. The gathering dissolved in fractured whispers. No one challenged her now, not because they no longer wanted to, but because the cost had been made clear. As Lyra walked from the circle, the moon above watched silently again. History had tried to repeat itself. And for the first time, it had been stopped. Chapter 10. The world did not rebel the next morning. That was the first lie. There were no battles announced.
No packs howl defiance.
No kings called banners or sharpened blades. Instead, letters were sent. Seals pressed into wax. Words chosen with care. Promises wrapped in courtesy. By dawn, messengers arrived at Stormhold bearing gifts instead of threats. Rare pelts, ancestral blades, moon-silver relics once reserved for coronations. Every offering carried the same message, written in different hands. We accept what the moon has decided. Lyra read them in silence. Acceptance, she had learned, was often only a delay. The Alpha King watched from across the chamber, saying nothing. He had ruled long enough to recognize the scent of patience sharpened into strategy. They are circling, he said at last. Not to strike. To wait. Lyra folded one letter and set it aside. They think time will make me negotiable. And will it? She met his gaze. Calm. Unflinching. No. That answer unsettled him more than defiance ever could. By midday, the council was convened. Not a summit. A consultation. No throne was raised for Lyra. No seat offered. She stood while kings sat, an omission too deliberate to be accidental. They spoke of balance. Of history. Of stability. They praised restraint while drafting conditions. A southern alpha leaned forward, voice smooth with diplomacy. No one questions her right to exist unclaimed, he said. But the world requires structure. We propose a framework. A leash, Lyra said quietly. The word landed cleanly. The alpha stiffened. Protection. Protection does not require obedience, she replied. Only consent. Murmurs spread. Another king intervened quickly. Then let us speak plainly. You cannot remain undefined. Lyra tilted her head. Undefined to whom? Silence answered. Because that was the problem. They did not fear her power. They feared not owning the narrative around it. The last Luna unified through bond, an elder said. Through hierarchy. And how did that end? Lyra asked. No one answered. The Alpha King rose then, not to dominate the room, but to end the charade. She will not be governed by councils she did not choose, he said, nor framed as a risk to be managed. One of the kings smiled thinly. You speak as if this is already decided. The Alpha King returned the smile. It is. The meeting dissolved without agreement. That night, the whispers began. Not of war. Of alternatives. Lyra was watched more closely now, by allies, by enemies, by those who had not yet decided which they would be. Doors closed a moment too late. Conversations ended when she entered. Power had changed its tactics. It no longer tried to seize her. It tried to surround her. Lyra stood at the balcony as night fell, the moon pale and distant once more. So this is what comes after survival, she murmured. The Alpha King joined her, keeping his distance. This is what comes after disruption, he said. They are waiting for you to slip. She smiled faintly. Then they don't know me at all. Below them, Stormhold slept. And far beyond its walls, the world adjusted its grip, softly, patiently, preparing for a future it could no longer control. Chapter 11. Stormhold grew quieter after the council. Not peaceful. Careful. Lyra felt it in the pauses between footsteps, in the way conversations softened when she passed, in the glances that lingered just long enough to ask a question no one dared voice aloud. Power changed how people stood near you. The 8 Guard felt it too. Once their presence had been unquestioned, oath-bound, unquestioned, inevitable. Now every one of them was watched as if their loyalty were a wager being quietly placed. Summons arrived within days. Not commands. Invitations. One was offered a title in the Eastern Territories. Another was promised land. A third was reminded, gently, of a debt long forgiven, but never forgotten. Choice arrived disguised as opportunity. They gathered that night not in the hall, but in the training yard, where truth had always been spoken with fewer words.
No armor.
No weapons.
No ranks.
Just 8 figures beneath a thin moon, standing where they had once trained for war. She won't ask us to stay, one of them said finally. No, another replied. She never would. That was the cruelest part. If Lyra had commanded them, it would have been easier. Obedience could have silenced doubt. But she had offered no order, only space. One by one, the weight of that freedom settled. Leaving would not be betrayal. Staying would be a decision. Inside the keep, Lyra sat alone at the long table meant for councils. The letters lay unopened this time. Her fingers traced the grain of the wood instead, grounding herself in something solid. She had survived abandonment before. This was different. This time, she had given people a reason to walk away, and had no right to stop them. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Then another. Then more. The door opened. Not all at once. One guard entered and bowed, not formally, not fully. We've been offered better lives, he said simply. Lyra nodded. Then you should take them. A second stepped forward. We were also warned. She met his eyes. About me. He hesitated. About what standing beside you will cost. Silence stretched. Then the third spoke. We talked. A pause. And the first guard inhaled slowly. We're done serving kings who fear change. The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. One by one, the 8 stepped into the chamber, not as a formation, not in rank, but as individuals choosing the same ground. They knelt, not in oath, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. We stay, the youngest said. Not because we must. Another added, voice rougher, but because we want to. Lyra's breath caught. Not in relief. In grief. Because chosen loyalty carried weight. She stood then, moving toward them, not towering, not distant. Then stand, she said softly.
No vows. No chance.
They rose. Family, not force. Outside, the moon drifted behind clouds, its light dim but present. The world could bargain. The world could threaten. But here, in this quiet chamber, Lyra understood something vital. She did not stand alone. And for the first time, power did not feel heavy. It felt shared. Chapter 12. Change did not arrive as a decree. It arrived as absence. For the first time in generations, packs delayed their petitions to the Alpha King. Disputes went unresolved not because authority had vanished, but because it no longer pointed in a single direction. All roads led to uncertainty. And uncertainty led back to Lyra. Not as a ruler. As a question. Stormhold became a crossroads. Wolves arrived without banners or demands. Some sought judgment. Others sought reassurance. A few came only to look, to measure the woman the moon had chosen and decide what she meant to them. Lyra did not hold court. She walked the grounds instead. Spoke to them in open air. Listened more than she answered. Power unused unsettled them more than power denied. An alpha from the low valleys approached her one evening, his posture respectful but tense. My pack has 3 omegas, he said. They fear being marked. Lyra studied him, not his strength, but his honesty. Do they fear the moon, she asked, or what you might do when it speaks? The question followed him as he left. Stories spread, not of commands issued, but of choices honored. Omegas permitted to refuse bonds without punishment. Alphas who waited rather than claimed. Packs that began rewriting old rights in quiet defiance of tradition. Not all welcomed it. Some kings called it erosion. Others called it weakness. But fewer and fewer called it heresy. Because nothing had broken. The moon still rose. Pax still held. Balance did not collapse. It shifted. One night, the Alpha King joined Lyra at the old watchtower overlooking the valley. Below them, torchlight flickered where wolves gathered, not summoned, not commanded. "They're waiting," he said. "For what?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "For you to stop pretending this isn't leadership." Lyra didn't answer right away. She watched the valley, the lives, the futures, the fragile trust forming without force. "I won't rule the way they expect," she said. "Good," he replied. Neither did the last world changer. Below, a howl rose, not sharp, not dominant. Invitational. Another answered. Then another. Not allegiance. Recognition. Lyra felt it settle into her bones, not the weight of command, but the responsibility of presence. The 8 guards stood behind her, not shielding, not flanking. Witnessing. "This won't end quietly," she said. "No," the Alpha King agreed. "But it won't end in blood either." For the first time, the word Luna was spoken aloud among the gathered wolves below. Not declared. Repeated. Lyra closed her eyes. The world was not asking her to kneel. It was asking her to lead differently. And somewhere beyond sight, the moon watched, waiting for the moment she would decide whether to answer. Chapter 13. The coronation was never announced. That alone unsettled the world. No summons were sent. No dates declared. No ancient horns sounded across the territories. And yet they came. Packs arrived at Stormhold without banners or demands. Alphas without entourages. Omegas without fear. Even those who had once spoken against her stood at the edges of the gathering, watching not with hunger, but with caution born of respect. Lyra stood beneath the open sky where stone gave way to earth and the moon rose unobstructed. She still wore no crown. The Alpha King stepped forward, not to place anything upon her head, but to stand beside her, equal in height, lesser in claim. "The world is already calling you Luna," he said quietly. "Whether you answer or not." Lyra looked at the faces before her. Not subjects. Witnesses. "I will not be crowned by tradition," she said, "nor bound by expectation." A ripple passed through the crowd, not disappointment, but understanding. "If Luna is to mean anything now," Lyra continued, "then it must mean protection without possession. Power without fear. Choice without consequence." Silence followed. Then one by one, wolves lowered their heads. Not in submission. In recognition. The 8 guards stepped forward, not bearing regalia, but carrying a simple circlet forged of moon silver and unadorned stone. No runes of dominance. No marks of ownership. Only a symbol of stewardship. Lyra hesitated. Not because she feared the crown, but because she understood what accepting it would cost. She lifted the circlet herself, and placed it upon her head. At that exact moment, the moon flared. Not red. Not wrathful. Pure silver flooded the clearing, and the world seemed to pause as a presence older than memory settled into the air. The moon goddess did not fully appear. She did not need to. Her voice echoed across the gathered wolves, calm and vast. "At last, one who understands." The light softened. "You were not chosen to rule over wolves. You were chosen to stand between what was, and what may be." Lyra closed her eyes as the blessing settled, not binding, not burning. "Change the world," the goddess said. "Not by command, but by courage." The light faded. The night exhaled. Lyra opened her eyes. She was Luna now. Not because fate demanded it, but because the world had learned how to ask. Chapter 14. The world did not change all at once. It never did. There was no single decree that rewrote history, no thunderous command that forced obedience from centuries of tradition. Instead, change arrived the way dawn always did in the Northern Territories, slowly, unevenly, and impossible to stop once it had begun. The first thing to change was silence. For generations, the halls where true omegas were discussed had been loud with hunger. Plans spoken openly. Challenges issued without shame. Names reduced to breeding potential and bloodlines. After Lyra's coronation, those halls grew quiet. Not respectful. Cautious. Alphas began lowering their voices when speaking of omegas. Some out of fear of the Alpha King. Others because the moon goddess's warning still echoed too clearly in their bones. No wolf wanted to be the one history remembered as having ignored her. The second change came through law. Not rewritten overnight, but bent. Challenges for omegas were no longer automatic. They required consent. Witnesses. Delay. Proof that the omega had spoken freely and without coercion. Many protested. Some openly. A few loudly enough to lose their standing. Those who challenged Lyra's authority did not meet her claws. They met her patience. She listened. She asked questions. She let them expose themselves. And then she let the Alpha King speak. Exile followed. Not dramatic. Not violent. Just, final. The third change was personal. Omegas began to walk differently. At first, only within pack borders. Heads lifted slightly. Hands no longer folded in constant apology. Scent masks loosened, not removed, but no longer layered in desperation. Some came to Stormhold seeking asylum. Others came simply to look at her. The Omega who had survived hiding. The Luna who had not been claimed. The woman who stood beside an Alpha King without belonging to him. Lyra welcomed them all. She did not promise safety. She promised truth. And truth, it turned out, was more powerful than reassurance. The fourth change came quietly. In the night. Lyra dreamed differently now. Not of running. Not of hiding. She dreamed of standing in open fields beneath a moon that watched without judgment. Sometimes the goddess was there. Not speaking. Just observing. Waiting. The Alpha King noticed the difference before anyone else did. "You're not bracing anymore," he said one evening as they stood overlooking the training grounds. Lyra didn't answer at first. Because he was right. For the first time in her life, she was not waiting for the world to turn on her. The packs still watched her. The alphas still measured her. But they no longer circled. They learned. And in that learning, something ancient began to crack. Not with violence. With understanding. Lyra did not rule through fear. She ruled through precedent. And precedent, once set, had a way of becoming law. The world did not kneel to her. It adjusted around her. And that, Lyra realized, was how real change survived. Chapter 15. It happened without ceremony.
No witnesses. No mondraites.
No blood, no vows carved into stone. Just a moment that arrived when neither of them was guarding themselves anymore. Lyra had learned slowly how to exist without bracing for impact. How to walk the corridors of Stormhold without counting exits. How to sit beneath the open sky and trust that the night would not demand anything from her. The Alpha King, Theon, to those who knew him beyond the crown, learned how to wait. That was the harder lesson. He did not touch her unless she reached first. Did not enter her chambers without invitation. Did not assume that fate excused impatience. Weeks passed like that. Then months. They spoke often, but rarely about the bond. They spoke of governance. Of old laws and stubborn alphas. Of the ache that lingered in Lyra's wolf after years of suppression. of the loneliness that came with ruling from the top. Sometimes they sat in silence. And silence, Lyra discovered, could be gentle. One evening, as autumn settled into the stones of Stormhold, Lyra found him on the eastern balcony, the one overlooking the lowlands where fog curled like breath over sleeping earth. "You're avoiding me," she said. He turned, surprised, not defensive. "I didn't want to pressure you." She studied him for a long moment. This man who could command armies, who had broken challengers with terrifying ease, who now stood uncertain, hands loose at his sides, waiting. "You didn't," she said. "You gave me space. And now." She stepped closer. Close enough that their wolves stirred, but did not surge. "Now I want to choose." His breath caught, not with dominance, but with relief. Lyra spoke carefully, because this mattered. "I am not ready to be claimed by tradition. I may never be. But I want partnership. I want companionship. I want a future that feels like it belongs to me, not one written for me." He nodded once. "Then that is what we will have. Just truth." She reached for his hand. The bond responded, not blazing, not overwhelming, but warm, steady, alive. It felt right. Not because the moon said so, but because she did. They did not seal the bond that night. They simply stayed. Watched the fog lift. Spoke until dawn. Let something fragile and real take root. For the first time, Lyra understood that love did not have to arrive like conquest. It could arrive like trust. Chapter 16. Lyra did not accept the bond in a moment of spectacle. She accepted it in the quiet days that followed, when nothing was demanded of her, when no one reached to claim what she had not freely offered. The Alpha King never pressed. He stood beside her in councils and battles alike, listening first, speaking second. He asked for her thoughts on borders, on laws, on food stores before winter. When elders argued, he turned to her, not for permission, but partnership. Slowly, carefully, Lyra learned what power looked like when it did not cage. And when she was ready, she spoke. The bond was sealed not in conquest, but in gathering. The 8 guards stood with her that day, not as sentinels, not as warriors, but as the men who had chosen her long before the world had learned how. They had bled for her name. They had broken laws for her safety. They had stood between her and alphas who would have torn her apart for power. Now they stood behind her. When Lyra stepped forward, the Alpha King did something no ruler had done in generations. He knelt. Not to claim her. To receive her choice. Lyra reached out, steady, unafraid, and accepted the bond. The moon did not blaze or burn. It warmed. A soft silver glow wrapped around them, gentle as breath, sealing what had already been true. The 8 guards gave her away together. Men who had torn enemies apart with bare hands did not hide their tears. Their shoulders shook as they bowed their heads, brothers not by blood, but by loyalty freely chosen. For the first time, Lyra belonged without being owned. As Luna, she did not rule by fear or prophecy. She walked the kingdom. She healed lands poisoned by old wars. Crops grew where her moonlight touched the soil. Rivers ran clear. Wolves who had been shunned for weakness found purpose again, healers, teachers, guardians. She never ruled alone. Every decree bore 2 voices. Every future plan was shaped together. The Alpha King honored old traditions, but only those that protected, never those that harmed. Where customs demanded obedience, Lyra demanded consent. Where history repeated cruelty, she ended it. And the kingdom flourished. Years later, beneath a calm moon that no longer bled red, Lyra gave birth to twins. A daughter, moon-kissed, powerful, but unburdened. A son, grounded strong, carrying his father's steadiness. At their naming, Lyra held them close and spoke words that echoed across the packs. They will not inherit fate, she said. They will inherit choice. The girl would never be hunted for what she was. The boy would never rule without listening. And the moon watched, silent, present, approving. Lyra was never a legend carved in stone. She was a woman who lived. Who chose love without losing herself. Who built family where there had once been fear. Who proved that destiny could be honored without being obeyed. And the world was better, not because she was marked, but because she stayed. If this story stayed with you, if Lyra's journey made you believe, even for a moment, that love can heal what the world tries to break, then this is not goodbye. This world is still breathing. There are more bonds yet to be chosen. More legends waiting to be born under the moon. Return, when you're ready, for more epic romance. More werewolf fairy tales. And stories where love is not claimed, but chosen. Until then, may the moon watch over you.